would want government to give it the land so that it will become safe. Right? Tomorrow it doesn't go into a lot of litigation. That is the general spirit of this demand for government acquiring land for private funds. But the way system works, it has been excessively used and abused, and all sorts of under the table dealings happen, and people suffer in this process. So we thought we'll look at it this time from the perspective of the people who actually suffer from land acquisition. That I came across is this country, 8% of our population is tribal. But if you look at the number of people affected by land acquisition in the last 60 years, is about 60 million, of which 40% are tribals. So obviously tribals are getting a very raw deal. So we thought we'll address this issue, look at this issue from the perspective of the tribals and what they go through, and what has been how they have been getting the compensation, or what they go through when their land gets acquired. So we are very, very fortunate to have Bhanumathi Kalluri garu. She is the director at Dhaatri Resource Center for Women and Children. She's worked very extensively on women issues, children issues, and she's worked very closely with tribals in tribal areas. She has participated in many campaigns against human rights violations. She's worked with campaigns against mining companies when they had to displace the local populations. She does a lot of research. It's not just not only activism, but she backs it with a lot of research. She publishes papers on various aspects, especially relating to women and children. She is the state representative monitoring right to education in Andhra Pradesh. So her grassroots level work is very recognized. So we thought no better person to give us a perspective on this issue. Bhanumathi garu, please.
Thank you for inviting me here. I think Mr. Suman has given a very concise background of the land acquisition process and the legal issues concerning land acquisition. As you also said, I will, since the background of my work has been with tribal communities and experiences of tribal communities in facing land acquisition for various projects, I will really try to focus most of my talk today in relation to tribal issues. Of course, when we say tribal, it's not as if they are an exotic, isolated community, and we're just talking of some remote communities who are affected without affecting our own lives. Although they are very remote, they are in interior areas, what happens to them has a very strong adverse effect on our own lives also. So I would like to urge you to look at that connection. There's no disconnect between what happens to them and what happens in our lives. Because it's the mainstream perspective, it's the mainstream approach to development which is causing the kind of misery in the tribal areas that has been happening historically and it continues to happen today. So therefore I hope we can bring in these linkages. I again would like to look at the whole issue of land acquisition from my own experience of living with different tribal communities in Andhra Pradesh. And just bring about some of the reflections of what has happened over the years. Like Mr. Suman said, about 8.5–8.6% of our population is tribal, Adivasis as we call them. However, acquisition of lands has happened primarily in tribal areas because of the resource-rich regions that they live in, because of the multiple projects that have happened on a very large scale. They're not very small, just construction of road or construction of a small factory, but they're really huge projects. So that kind of large scale projects has had very large scale impact on their lives and livelihoods. To begin with, after I passed out of university, the first 6 months I went and lived with the Chenchu tribe in the Nalumala forest. I don't know if you've heard of the Chenchus. They're a primitive tribal group who were nomadic hunter-gatherers who had very rich ways of symbiosis with the forest, because their whole life was linked to the natural resources in the forest. When I lived with them, I mainly lived with the communities the Chenchus, who were displaced by the first prestigious project on dams, the Nagarjuna Sagar project, and then the Sri Salem project. What I saw was not what I studied in the textbooks, that India needs these kind of developments for putting us on the map of the world. Because the people there, even today, even if you go today into these villages, they still haven't been compensated for what they have lost after all these years of independence. They still live a very, very meager subsistence. They've been thrown out of their forests because the forest lands were submerged for the dam. Very meager compensation. The Chenchu tribe had no concept of individual property, because they were a nomadic tribe and they had only common property depending on the forest. At that time, they had no concept of farming, agriculture, so when they were displaced, there was no way that they could even show that this land belonged to them, because it was a large area and they moved from one patch of the forest to the other. So today they are living as quarry workers. I mean, they have had to migrate out of their areas, or they're living in the backwaters. A lot of people go to Nagarjuna Sagar as a holiday, weekend holiday visit. But just beyond Nagarjuna Sagar are all those hamlets where people have lost their lands and forests. And they now live as quarry workers in all those Macharla, Pidugurala, if you know, Guntur district, Prakasam, all those areas. They work as daily wage laborers, rickshaw pullers, selling flowers. So these are all the, from a life which was, it may not be comfort as we would define it, but they had their own way of life which was within their self-sustaining ways of living. But that was completely grabbed from them, and they were just thrown out to cope with the mainstream population in the lowest rung of society. So today they are condemned as alcoholics. Most of them, even when I was living there, I used to find it very difficult to have a meeting because men, women were drunk. And if I were to look at it from a mainstream perspective, it would be like they had a very, low lifestyle. But then this is a sad result of what has happened because of development to them. But government justifies building these large dams. None of them have had any proper rehabilitation. There was no electricity, although electricity was provided to the outside world. These were large irrigation hydel projects. They were not even having lands, forget getting their lands irrigated. So what happens, the benefits of a project do not really pass on to the people who actually lose their lands. So today the land acquisition policy and the rehabilitation bill that has been tabled in 2011 and the standing committee, parliamentary standing committee's recommendations have had a history of struggle behind them. Today, if they are to some extent progressive, it's because of a lot of injustice, lot of iniquity that has happened to lakhs of tribal communities and of course many other communities. So this is one example that I could give of what happened when people were displaced. And then I moved to Vizag district. I'm sure many of you have visited the beautiful Araku Valley and the Bora caves, and almost every Telugu film has got some snatches of these beautiful areas. But behind these beautiful areas, there are people who live with a lot of struggle. When I first went there to work with the communities, the constant issue that came up to my notice was that the tribal people were having cases booked on them, criminal cases booked on them. And my everyday life was to just go and bail them out and get their cases either cancelled or appear for hearings, because the forest department was consistently booking cases on them because they were considered as illegal encroachers. Now, all these communities that I was living with were actually originally from Orissa. And since Vizag district and Orissa, Koraput district are contiguous areas, a lot of so-called development happened in Orissa. A lot of dams were constructed on this Jolapur, Seeleru, Balimela. There are a lot of mining projects. Nalco, one of the biggest mining industries, was set up there. So there was, southern Orissa has really received development in the most negative sense. And hundreds of villages were thrown out of their homes. Many families lost their land, and a lot of them migrated to the Andhra side of their region. So I was working in area, I mean almost the whole of Vizag district scheduled area is mostly having, it has a high population also because of this migration that happened from Orissa. Today of course there are people of Andhra Pradesh, but since there was already tribal populations living in Vizag, there was a lot of pressure on land. And all the valley land was already occupied by either tribals or non-tribals in Benami names. So the tribals who came after these projects came up, I'm talking about 60s and 70s, they had to settle on the hill slopes, on the higher elevations. And if you have some idea of the laws, we have something called the revenue lands and forest lands. And forest lands are again categorized into different areas, particularly reserve forests. And these forests are supposed to be left for forests alone, and they are state property. After the British came, forests were defined as state property. Until the time of the British, they were, tribal communities had their own boundaries, and each patch of forest was, belonged to their, and therefore actually if we go back to the Indian independence struggle, where the tribal people's contribution has not been acknowledged in our independence struggle. In fact, the tribal people had really fought the British a lot because their customary laws with relation to forests, with relation to their cultural practices was completely curbed when the British suddenly came and said all this forest belongs to us. And they started laws because they needed for the world wars, lot of timber and lot of shipbuilding and railways. So I don't know if you have seen Allu Sita Ramaraju film. It was actually symbolic of the tribal people's rebellion against the British administration and this alien laws that were introduced in their lands. Therefore forest is such a strong association for the tribals because of their very life is based on these resources. Their livelihood is based on these resources, and their customary practices and cultural practices are linked to what their relation with the forest. Now when the state came and said all this forest belongs to us, all the tribal people became illegal for no fault of theirs, especially when they were displaced and they were forced to occupy these lands. They had cases booked on them saying that they have encroached onto these forests. So in the initial years, we had to argue a lot, campaign a lot to, say that they have had to so-called encroach because they were forced out of their lands, and who is responsible for them being kicked out of their lands? Because you pay a compensation. In those days, compensation was about 500 rupees an acre. My team, many of them from my team who are from the Adivasi community, lost their lands, and their parents just got 500 acres. 500 rupees, and you know the corrupt system, so they would have got 1/5 of that amount actually. So they can't buy any land with that money, and obviously they would have had to migrate and occupy other areas. So this is a very large problem that has happened, and we've been fighting on this, and that has also resulted in the Forest Rights Act that came in 2005, which has recognized that people who were in occupation of forest lands prior to 2005 have a right to cultivate, and they cannot be considered as encroachers. So this act has again been a result of years of tribal revolts and struggles. So even after the act has come, in the 1990s, our economy had suddenly opened up to market economy, and there was this whole move towards privatization and liberalization. So there's been a lot of discussion over what has the impacts of liberalization and privatization. But what I have seen with the tribal people, I can narrate from first-hand experiences. Suddenly from large development projects like hydel projects and dams, which were considered as required for our nation building, we moved to commercial trade and activities, which also came within the ambit of development. And in Vizag district, one of the largest stakeholders has been the mining industry, because it has many deposits of bauxite, limestone, primarily bauxite and limestone. And in fact, the entire Central Indian tribal belt has got mineral resources, coal, uranium, there are several mineral resources. And even the formation of these states of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh were more with the intention of consolidating the mineral resources and exploiting them, rather than actually creating a consolidated development plan for the tribals. So while in Orissa, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, mining has happened already in a very large way. In AP, it has been mainly Singareni collieries which have tapped the coal mines in the tribal belt. But in Vizag district, mining, suddenly lands were leased out to mining companies. And when people came and told us that we are losing land, we've been asked to give away our land, we started trying to gather information about why their land was going. And what we saw was that the tribal land was given on lease by the government to private companies like the Birla Group. I was particularly involved in this large campaign against land acquisition by the Birlas. while we go into this whole development debate, I'll explain what happened actually on the ground when land acquisition was happening. People had no clue about what was the project. They were not given any project information, how much of land would be taken, what would be the extent of water resources that would be tapped. There were several things kept in the dark, and like Mr. Suman said, the big challenge that confronted us was public purpose, because everything was happening on the guise of public purpose. So the question is all private commercial activity classified as public purpose? Is there a distinction between really public good and private? So today, if any of us wants to go and set up a company, and if it says it's public purpose, then there is no distinction between the state and the non-state players. So when we started questioning, the government started attacking, saying this group is anti-development because they're trying to stop us from developing the tribal people. So we started looking at, was it really developing the tribal people, and what are the grounds? We questioned what were the grounds on which this project was actually focused on developing the tribal people. Because none of them were offered jobs, although verbally they were all promised a lot of incentives, that you have these fitness centers, we say before, after. So similarly, before mining comes, your life is so miserable, and after mining comes, your life will be so rosy. So they were given all these oral promises, but there was no written commitment. And the very fact that the government was, there are two issues. One is the whole definition of public purpose, and the second thing is state, by which I mean the government, acting on behalf of a private player for acquisition of lands. A government or state is supposed to be neutral. It's supposed to represent all of us as citizens equally. Whereas this whole inequality, imbalance comes because the government is standing on behalf of the company and forcing the people to give away their lands without listening to their pleas. So there is no balance in the government's approach towards treating people equally. And this is where the whole conflict came, because it was so blatant that a lot of violations were happening, legal violations, human rights violations. If you look at the tribal areas, the reason the constitutional mandate given to the government was that these are communities who are having a unique kind of life, which is not able to engage on an equal footing with the mainstream society, because their way of living, their so-called literacy levels are all differing from our mainstream society, and therefore exploitation by mainstream forces is so much more easier. And therefore, in order to protect these communities from being exploited, the constitutional safeguards that were created were linked to protecting their lands, their forests. So we have something called the 5th schedule in the constitution, 5th and 6th schedules. The 5th schedule is for all the states in India, and the 6th schedule is for the northeastern states. How administration and governance have to take place in these regions. So one of the strong aspects of the 5th schedule is that these regions have to be demarcated as scheduled areas, and land cannot be transferred to people who are not tribal themselves. So either immovable property or land or forest, any resources cannot be transferred to outsiders. And these strong...
How do you define tribal?
The country has already... there are certain aspects of tribal in terms of their cultural, their language, their way of life. And under the 5th schedule laws, certain tribes have been defined as scheduled tribes. So therefore we have this term ST. So they are all recognized tribes under the Constitution of India. Of course, there is an injustice where some of the tribes have not been notified under this, so therefore they have not been given the status of scheduled tribes. But to a large extent, there are very strong measurements of how you look at tribal, and they have already been recognized. So in AP also we have 33 recognized tribes. Now the thing is, land cannot be transferred to persons other than tribal, and the earlier land related exploitation, which was primarily between feudal landlords, like the movies that we see, where land grabbing took place by big landlords from the plains, that has gradually shifted to, after the 90s, large scale industries. So the landlord became the industry and the state itself, because the government is actually violating the constitution, violating the 5th schedule laws by giving leases to companies in tribal lands. So that's how we went to the court questioning how, if I as an individual woman cannot buy land, but if I were to belong to the Birla group, I can buy land. So that's a duality of the way the state was looking at tribal, not tribal. So therefore we question the whole legitimacy of the government's right to give away tribal lands to individual companies. And the Supreme Court actually upheld our argument and defined that a corporate body is also equal to a non-tribal person. So therefore any transfer of lands in scheduled areas from a tribal person either to an individual or a corporate body amounts to violation of the land transfer regulations. So this was a landmark judgment. But so these cases actually led to this whole thought of changing the Land Acquisition Act itself, amending the Act. Because behind the whole issue of land acquisition is a lot of questions that should be coming up about our perceptions of development and our whole perceptions of economics.
Just one question. So the Supreme Court has ruled that you cannot transfer land to a corporate. Then what is the current bill also has that provision? How does that match? Still today we have.
Yeah, actually, what the Supreme Court said was no corporate body can be given lands on lease in the scheduled areas, but it left a clause because no law can be absolute. It says unless there is a dire necessity to exploit these resources, if and only if these are the resources that need for development of these areas and nothing else, then government institution can undertake mining activities, or a society of tribal people themselves can take up mining activities. So this is what the Supreme Court said. But post the Supreme Court judgment, what happened in the state of Andhra Pradesh, we actually went to court to protect the lands, about 1700 acres of Anantagiri. I don't know if you have seen the Borra caves. We actually started our fight because the Borra caves itself were leased out, because they are limestone formations, and limestone mining leases were given, and the caves would have collapsed if we had not stopped, gone to the court. Of course, before we went to the court, procedure was very long. The people really stood and fought and did not allow mining operations to start. But saying the case first started with the Borra. Today, Andhra Pradesh tourism gets its highest revenue from this region, and they wanted to destroy the caves. So this whole question of how do we look at economics again comes in. You know, what is profitable? How do we define viability of projects? So after the Samata judgment, the Supreme Court judgment, the AP government signed an MOU secretly with the Jindals, saying because the Supreme Court verdict is an obstacle, we will enter into an agreement with you, because the Supreme Court had left an open clause that a state institution could take up mining activities. But the way the spirit of the constitution is diluted, it said as a last resort, but as a first, immediately after the Supreme Court orders, as a very first act, the government signed an MOU with the Jindal saying that bauxite extraction can be done, will be done by AP Mineral Development Corporation. But the rights of this is given to the Jindals, which means A to Z of mining, identification of the land, acquisition of land on behalf of the Jindals, extraction, exporting, who would be the buyer, who would be the do the refining. All the decisions regarding mining activities would be done by the Jindals. So this was a very blatant violation of constitutional verdict. And this is how the state is trying to be devious and being so proactively working on behalf, bending over backwards for private commercial interests. When actually what happened was, in the case of the Birlas, land between the tribals, when they transfer, when they buy and purchase land, it's at very nominal prices because they are almost close to barter system. So cash flow is very low. So they would, the market value, because land acquisition is based on market value of lands in tribal areas, is very low. So at that time it was just about 1,000 rupees. So the Birlas were offering 1,000 rupees, 1,500 rupees per acre of land. Now they have a capacity to buy the entire Vizag district scheduled area at that rate. Yeah. Then the government was financing a road, and the GO was signed giving permission for construction of this road. So when we started the campaign stopping this road, this whole issue of again anti-development came up, because we are here to develop the tribals, to bring them to the mainstream, to provide facilities. But the road that was given to the Birlas was sanctioned was a 45 feet wide road, but actually they were building a 90 feet wide road, because no tribal is literate enough to look at the MOU, to look at the GO, and even the district collector was not aware that they were building a road double the width of what they had the permission for. So one is the issue of constitutional right, and the other is the issue of regulation. Who regulates, and do we have the capacity to regulate? Does the government have the capacity to govern and monitor as per the laws? They were given 120 acres of land on lease, but they had occupied more than 500 acres. And the tribal people can easily be bullied. You can just dump all your stuff. They had occupied the primary school as their storeroom. Entire villages, they had put up their tents, because the Border Roads organization was actually building the road. So there was a whole army, real army there stationed with all their trucks and ammunition. And actually the ammunition was a lot of times stolen by the Maoists, because that was also for them good access. There was a lot of incidents of violations on women, sexual harassment, there was rape, and none of these, when we took it up with the government, were considered as serious enough issues in lieu of what was going to happen when mining projects take place. Then there was no, there's something called we have the environment laws in our country, in the Environment Protection Act, which stipulates a lot of things before a project is cleared. Many of these regulations under the Environment Act were violated because the Birlas they are supposed to do an EIA, Environment Impact Assessment, for every project, and this is mandatory, and submit this to the government, to the Ministry of Environment and Forests, and also give this to the people as for public consultation, where the local people have a right to raise objections or have right to information about what is going to happen in their lands. The EIA was actually done only for the refinery in Vizag city, outside Vizag city. And when we actually went into, in those days, this whole issue of trying to look at the EIA was very new. So we were looking at each step of violations that were happening. So when a project comes, there are several legal violations. And clearances come because they are able to pull a lot of strings. The EIA document did not have an environment impact assessment of the mine site where the extraction was actually going to take place. It only had for the processing unit in Vizag, outside Vizag. So these were questions that we had to unearth. So when we went to the court, of course we had filed many cases because there were several legal violations. They could not produce the EIA for the tribal area. And no tribal would ever know that this was violated. The lease, when earlier a tribal himself applied for a lease, the Pollution Control Board struck down the application saying that it is environmentally hazardous to do mining here. And immediately after that, the Birlas had applied and they got a no clearance, no objection certificate from the Pollution Control Board. So these are all the discrepancies that happened. There was no clear information about the water body, how much of water would be actually taken away. In fact, not just the tribal area, the refinery, they were given permission to dig 400 bowells in Deanley town, whereas that entire region has a huge water shortage. The domestic consumption is only met 50% by the government today. So in Vizag city, if it is 80 mgd of water requirement, there is only 40 mgd that is being supplied. And the Birlas got 400 bowels permission to take as much of water as they wanted. Later the Jindals were given permission to divert 10 mgd of water from Vizag city to their refinery site. So when there was already a shortage of 50%, the government has just given another 10 mgd to a company. So this whole issue of now, is a Jindal refinery more important or drinking water facility more important for the general citizens? So these are all issues we have to contest instead of just looking at larger, development versus non-development. Then the whole issue of compensation. They said that the road was for the tribal people and 13 crores was given by the government to the Birlas to build this road. So why this kind of subsidy? We cry hoarse when 1 rupee rice is given and say that our Indian economy is collapsing because of these subsidies to the poor. But the kind of hidden subsidies that go to large industries, which don't come to the public notice, is really something that we should be seriously questioning. They built a road in 1992-93. To this day, if you go there, there is no public transport. So no tribal will be foolish to walk 22 kilometers when they have shortcut paths where they can come down from their villages with a much shorter time, unless you provide a public transport. So if the road were meant for tribal, then you should be providing public transport. Otherwise there is no need. But it was obviously for the trucks of the mining company to transport their ore. So after the case, of course we fought, and finally the compensation, we managed to bring it up to from 1500 to 1.5 lakhs per acre, because we said that the corporate body cannot just take away land at that kind of rate. So now the Jindals are there. They are also getting a similar treatment where all kinds of laws are being diluted. They're not supposed to take forest lands. So government is going, it just hunts on behalf of the company to look for where the forest land ends and where revenue land begins, and identifies the land and forces people to give their lands. And what is projected to the public and to the urban educated public is a very different story, saying that this land is very unviable. We are here to develop the tribals. They will all get employment. They will all be economically much more better off. But actually, if you read these project documents, not a single tribal locally is offered a job. None of them are skilled. And today the industry is so mechanized, you require very few technical professional people to handle any of these projects. So the local people have really no benefit out of these big projects coming into their lands. They may benefit just for the sake of the initial years of construction of their mine sites or roads or townships. And after that, what happens? Land would give them a continuous benefit, a continuous livelihood, which can't be really measured. And what happens after the project comes is a very temporary phase of wage labor for a year or a couple of years. And then after that, what happens? So most of the time, the social impact assessment reports give reassurances that, oh, there will be direct and indirect benefits. And the stress is more on the indirect benefits. By indirect benefits, they mean that you can, because of the growth in population of external workers and the populations coming in, you can set up pawn shop, you can set up cycle shop, you can set up tea stall. So are everybody in the community going to set up tea stalls and pawn shops? What is going to be the the impact on the majority of the population? The way in the land records, land is shown as unviable, uncultivable wasteland. Most of the time, government justifies land acquisition saying uncultivable wasteland. But actually, if you go to those areas, government may have given them as an uncultivable wasteland, but people develop their land. They work for the generations, 2 generations, 3 generations to work on to develop that land from a wasteland to really, in fact, if you go to the Jindal refinery site, there are rich paddy fields, coconut, banana plantations, and they have multiple sources of income and food. So one of the big issues, what really hits the people is their food security. Because in a traditional tribal economy, there is a diverse food that is grown and collected from the forest. So you have today we have all these high-end stores selling cereals and high fiber food as nutrition. Whereas these communities have already practiced, have always had this kind of nutrition as a way of their life. And today we are completely denying them this way of life and pushing them into a wage labor kind of a situation. If you go to most of the mine sites in the tribal areas like Nalco or Mahanadi coal fields or western coal fields, any of these, in Jharkhand, Orissa, we had done actually 2 studies, national level studies on impacts of mining projects on children and on women. We were just trying to look at, if we say development, then there should be some basic indicators of development, even the Millennium Development Goals of basic education, basic nutrition, health indicators. So we were trying to compare if mining had really any positive impact on these growth indicators that we define as development. And in fact, there was no, or we did not find that the nutrition levels of the children were any better than children who were in a non-mining situation. Or in fact, they were even worse because they had no access to this diverse food that was usually available to them. The literacy levels were no better. And in fact, there was an increase in child labor because the situation is such that people are forced to get into wage labor, and because of the highly polluting, highly physically hazardous kind of labor, the parents tend to get all kinds of health problems, respiratory illnesses, all kinds of occupational health problems, and then children are forced to get into child labor to support their families. If you go to Keonjhar, if you go to the coal fields areas, all these areas, you find a lot of child labor where there would not have been child labor before. And if you look at the reproductive health issues, there are new kinds of reproductive health problems that it's so difficult for now the onus of proving that my health, my disabled child was born because of the impact of the pollution or the contamination to the water in our village. So the company doesn't have to prove anything, the government doesn't take any accountability. So this whole issue of who takes accountability to what happens. And today even the Land Acquisition Act is talking about affected families. There's a whole definition on affected families. That if I lose my land, I am an affected family. If I lose my tree, or if I lose my house, I am an affected family. Now, if you take the example of mining projects, there are multiple kinds of effects. One is the immediate village which is displaced, relocated. A lot of pollution happens and there is no accountability to it. A lot of spillage, a lot of water bodies are the same. So downstream, there's an entire hinterland of farmers, fishing communities, people who are just drinking, using that water, consuming. Now, are they or do they come under affected community or not? Now, the other issue is there's a very severe depletion of groundwater because the mining companies just suck out water. Therefore, you have all these big pits with water, and unless the aquifers are dried up, they can't extract the mineral. So all the groundwater aquifers get dried, and it's not just in the immediate lease area. It happens in an entire district or an entire mandal. If you go to Goa, one whole district by the Sterlite iron ore company has become depleted. So what was once a rich paddy and coconut belt, even if you just see, you don't have to do a scientific environmental testing. You just look at the coconut trees, how they are and how they are in were before. Or huge areas are left fallow today because there is no groundwater, or because there's so much of dust pollution that it's impossible to cultivate anything. Now, who pays for this? Are they impacted communities or not? How do we define an affected family? So when there is no accountability either to the immediately affected community or to the larger affected community, then this whole issue of really what is sustainable and what is profitable, when we are projecting certain financial figures as the project impact in terms of exports, or in terms of foreign exchange. A lot of costs are not worked out within the project cost. If we were to really work out the project cost, as to I have lost 100 tamarind trees, each tamarind tree will give me at least 1000 rupees per year as income from the tamarind. But I get only 500 rupees because of losing the tamarind tree. It's not even giving me that year's income. Yeah. So then when you cost, you will just cost that, the project cost is so many acres of land at 1500 rupees an acre, and 500 rupees a tree or 1000 rupees a tree. If that is our cost, then obviously our profit will look very highly viable. But if we were really to take a proper rehabilitation cost or proper losses, how do you account for the loss of a culture? Culture is just not singing and dancing, which people normally relate to, or we just think. Behind that is a way of life. Behind that is an economics of life, which completely gets destroyed. How do you? What value do we give that? And we are converting them into a community which is at our mercy. Last week, I was trying to pursue a case of urban eviction, not even a tribal situation, where slum dwellers were just evicted and they are again called encroachers. So they were obviously agitated and putting up a lot of demands. And the government was saying, oh, these people want to depend on the government for everything. Now you kick them out, you destroy their access to school, their access to daily wage labor, access to basic facilities, and you put them in an area where they have absolutely no facilities, and you say they want to depend, creating a whole sense of dependency where there was no dependency. If we are going to call this as development, then we really are asking for trouble, because agitated people who are really hungry and who are really on the brink of survival will find obviously violent ways of rebelling. And in the tribal areas we have very active extremist forces. And the government's way of trying to address this is to pump in a lot of greyhounds, and lot of huge money is being allocated for suppressing these movements and blaming the tribals for joining these movements. Obviously, when you're denying basic rights, they will seek redressal somewhere. In the absence of grievance redressal in a mainstream state established format, you will try to seek grievance redressal in other formats, right? When there is no regulation, we have seen the case of Bellary, where the stakes are so high that there is no state there. There is only the state of the mining mafia. Now, when you create a situation of a stateless society where the entire governance machinery is helpless, then you are really asking for social insecurity. Social unrest is going to be huge. And when these stakes are so high, we know that our governance mechanisms are really weak, are so susceptible to corruption, do not have the manpower to regulate. The Labour Department hardly has any manpower to go and check a site. Revenue Department does not have the manpower to actually go and survey the land. Forest Department does not have the manpower to see if the forest land is only 30 acres on lease. Is it only restricted to 30 acres, or the company is going to 300 acres? Most often it stretches to 300 acres because there is no watchdog other than the people. And people are, since they are very inarticulate, the tribal people hardly have a political lobby to represent their problems, nor do they have an economic strength to really fight the judiciary, or approach the judiciary or approach larger forces. So therefore it is left to civil society groups to try and get their voices heard, try and get their representation. So I can give hundreds of examples of how these violations have been happening. I'd rather stop here, and if you want to ask any questions you can, because I also am not going too much into the technicalities of the land acquisition bill. If you have, we can discuss it. Because the standing committee has given quite progressive recommendations where it's talking about this whole issue of public purpose, that it should be linear for really public infrastructure, and not that everything should coming under the umbrella of public purpose. So there are certain, of course they have, the standing committee also has recommended that there should be a development plan for scheduled areas where there is displacement. But we have moved from, if you look at the earlier rehabilitation policy, for tribal areas it was non-displacing alternatives was the first priority of the rehabilitation policy. From that we have moved to displacement as a must. That development has to happen at the cost of people. That displacement has to happen if we need development. So these are premises on which development is moving forward. Even the land acquisition and rehabilitation bill starts with this premise that infrastructure and displacement are necessary for moving ahead into a larger economy, and therefore we will take some corrective measures to reduce the impact of displacement. It is not talking about do we really require this kind of a project or not. That question is now today not being asked. It is like, oh, we will provide better incentives, better development programs. But even with the most fantastic development programs, the implementation at the ground is really weak. We as a country do not have the capacity to regulate, do not have the capacity to govern with as per our constitutional laws. Because of the whole issue of corruption, the whole issue of susceptibility to lobbies which are now taking over our policy level decision making, are changing the very ethos of development today. So when it comes to tribal people, they are really the last society that we would think about when we are considering development, that they are the refugees of development. So I would say that it would help if all of you can really reflect on what we mean by economics, what we mean by sustainable development. Is the way that we are going really sustainable? Yeah. And how would we, as a new generation which is going to face these resource is going to be a crisis. Water as a resource, we are facing it today, but the solutions are, we are trying to look for solution elsewhere, not the core issues. We are depleting our water resources so badly, and we don't have our energy, and we're misusing our energy so much that the domestic consumer is facing the brunt, whereas the larger commercial players are really, they can pay any cost. You can pay more, more money for your electricity, but then we have only a limited resource. It's not an endless, infinite resource. So how are we going to really ensure that there is a balance in resource utilization unless there's social equity? Unless the bottom line of our development is social equity, we will not be able to really either sustain ourselves or reduce these gaps and reduce these social insecurity. Thank you.
A few questions. One is the current compensation mechanism. Do you think it is good, in the sense that it has been increased for rural areas about 4 times the price of land, and for urban areas twice the price of land that is being acquired, right? That is what the state has to compensate.
Yeah.
Do you think it is a fair enough way to compensate?
See, that is what the government is trying to justify displacement, that we will give a fairer compensation, better compensation. With that money, is there land available for a farmer to go and buy another piece of land? How is his livelihood going to happen, take place beyond this?
No, but this is also
because most
the price of the land also, what they're saying is if an industry is acquiring the land, it will be priced as an industrial land, not as a farmland, which is lower priced. So you will be compensated 4 times.
I know, so that government can only offer more and more money. It can't offer a livelihood. Yeah, how is it, unless my livelihood is compensated, no monetary compensation is going to really add value to my way of life.
So do they show the land that, okay, this is a...
It depends on your ability, on the community's strength of negotiation, on the, maybe presence of NGOs who are able to also demand transparency or ask for land. So in a tribal context, people are really taken for a ride. And even if they're shown land, it's in India we really don't have land. Now what is going to happen to all the farmers who are kicked out? They only end up as, migrant labor. Our whole unorganized sector has multiplied so much. Today we have huge pockets of urban, migrant populations which are really suffocating the cities. Whereas if you had developed their villages in the real sense, perhaps there wouldn't be this need to, migrate so much. And the cash compensation is, at the end of the day, it ends. Most of the time, cash compensation is used for paying off debts, conducting some marriage ceremonies, so whatever, immediate, because it's such a, people have not seen so much of money in their lives at one go, that they think it's endless, and then they spend so much, and youth spend it on motorbikes, on their consume. Today, the consumer, I'm telling you, when people know, the market knows that there is land acquisition compensation being paid, so immediately the insurance agents are there in that village, the television shops are there, motorbike shops are open, liquor shops are open, yeah, all kinds of consumer shops immediately come up, and within a year or two the money dries up. Because there is, where will you invest? You don't have land to buy, and it's so, the land that you get is so bad that it kind of fragments them, it's not viable.
So what you're saying is right, that this has to be done very sparingly, but you do understand that at times it may be needed.
Yeah, so at times it may be needed. Now who is going to decide whether this is really required and for what purpose, public purpose, unless it's really honestly, sincerely public purpose. And that is the only activity required for that region. One shouldn't go in for it.
Yeah, but what kind of regulation you think is needed to make sure that it is clearly defined?
No, we already have lot of regulations. India is a country which has fantastic laws. The problem is in actually implementing these laws and both the political will and also the governance administration, which is above vulnerability to lobbies which are very strong. Yeah.
I get your point when you say that cash dries up and you need to provide them with a sustainable livelihood. But since they are tribals and they don't have a lot of skills to take forward to the other part of the world, what kind of livelihood would you provide if you were given a chance? I mean, the way I think.
Yeah, this is, I wouldn't have a blanket program saying you have to do basket making or something like that. But see, in these forest areas, minerals are not the only resource. It is just that this resource is projected in financial terms as very highly profitable. There are several other resources. Now you're just extracting one resource at the cost of destroying all other resources. I'm just giving you an example of this. So there are forests, so people every day go into the forest and collect forest produce. Firstly, as long as their life is within their hands, there is a local economy and not a global economy where they are always at the mercy of larger markets, international markets. Then it makes them more and more dependent. Yeah. Second is, if government is really keen, all these resources can be converted into viable industries where the first beneficiaries are the tribal people and the rest of the world also benefits. Today in our kitchen, we don't realize how much we are depending on the tribals. Our tamarind, our turmeric, our honey, all our consumable food items come from these areas, and we don't think about what goes behind keeping these areas. If the tribals were to cut down the forest to make all our beautiful furniture like we live in our urban lifestyle, then there wouldn't be these resources in our kitchens. So there is a whole difference in the way we look at it. So there is a viable livelihood that can be developed if we tap the resources, if we are able to provide a whole generation of youth which is coming out as first generation literates with a lot of vocational skills, with a lot of professional skills, harvesting their resources and not destroying their resources.
You mean some kind of
There are several industries which can come up based on their food, based on their medicinal plants, based on their forest produce. There are any number. If only government had the will to do it. It's just that it does not have, these are not maybe industries which are having the kind of high stakes that a large one mining industry would have to influence the policy or to pay.
So I think the question is, if you have to do mining there, if that is required, then how would you think is the right way to compensate, if not money, then what is the right way to compensate?
No, money, I'm saying that,
not just money.
yeah, it's not just money. There are a whole lot of things that one has to reinstate. That, your proper housing, your proper, that there is a sustainable livelihood, that local people do get a livelihood, and not just this kind of temporary wage labor. Yeah. Then you train the tribal communities, create a technical manpower from within the tribal communities. They're definitely capable if you provide the opportunities. Yeah. And the way, our environment regulations, we have to respect our environment regulations. Unless we're just going to justify violating. If we say that for every time forest land is supposed to not to be used for non-forestry activities, but every time a mining project comes up, the government says, oh, this is economically required for the country, so therefore we will dilute this law.
So also, is the mining covered under land acquisition bill, or is it a separate?
No, it's covered under land acquisition bill. Obviously, any kind of land acquisition has to.
Well, what I read is some.
No, there are several more issues with regard to mining, which I think the standing committee did not have time to go into, because now, of course, because of the pressure, because of the struggles that have been happening, campaigns that have been happening, the government has announced that the mining Ministry of Mines has announced that 26% of profit will be shared with the local community. So these are issues that are coming up.
I just have a summary of the bill. So what it says is the provisions of this bill do not apply to 16 existing legislations that provide for land acquisition. These include Atomic Energy Act 1962, National Highways Act 1956, SCZ Act 2005, Land Acquisition Mines Act 1885 and Railways Act 1989. So that means is mining land acquisition
Of
related
course,
to
atomic
mining?
energy, they will say for defense purposes, it is a blanket decision of the government. So uranium mining will not have.
So what I'm saying is that mining has its own Land Acquisition Mines Act.
Yeah, Mines Act is actually under the Labour Department.
Yeah, so this act apparently doesn't seem to apply for mining. I mean, even if
No, Mines Act doesn't actually deal with land acquisition. Mines Act deals with how mining should take place, what are the facilities to be created for workers, so the Mines Act itself is not dealing with land acquisition.
The name is Land Acquisition Mines Act. So different railways has a different Land Acquisition Act.
Yeah.
Mines has a different Land Acquisition Act, and this is apart from railways, mines. If you have to build a road or these private things, that I think that's
No, but it definitely applies for mining projects. Yeah. And it says now 100 acres, you don't have to do any rehabilitation, or you don't have to do an EIA. So everybody will acquire 99 acres. Every company will acquire 99 acres to just circumvent that responsibility. Yeah.
What is the role of an individual,
Particularly in?
these kind of issues?
what can an individual do?
Role of an individual.
Or it should. Yeah, that's interesting. It depends on what you are as an individual, professionally and personally. Because a lot of us in urban areas, we may be connected to these issues either as consumers of these goods. So there is a whole question of, at an individual level, a moral decision of whether I buy this good, whether it is fair trade or not. So these are some issues. And when you may be also working in companies which are related to any of these projects. So probably you could even look at your own company's profile of the CSR. Does CSR really translate into accountability to the projects and the people that the company affects? Because today what happens is CSR is now the buzzword for as a solution for every violation. Yeah, I will rape here, but I will give one girl scholarship in some other state, and therefore I have atoned for mine. Yeah. So in Orissa the mining companies will plunder and create lot of environmental human rights hazards. But there is a whole, somewhere in Rajasthan they will give scholarships to students and fund cricket matches. Now the whole issue is about the Olympics Games are financed by Dow Chemicals and Rio Tinto and BHP Bulletin. So there is a whole moral question of, how do we look at these issues? Yeah.
Jindal started on human research, human rights award.
Yeah, so we from civil societies keep giving our awards to companies which are the worst and ill-reputed. So Jindals in Bellary have really destroyed the environment, but they have a very nice cultural heritage, some project also there to preserve the culture of that region. So these are all very, dichotomous ways of justifying the loot. So at an individual level, a lot can be done. Like I said, from your consumption to where your work life to proactively really supporting campaigns where you feel that these kind of violations are happening. Because today, thanks to media, thanks to our internet, there is a whole access to information that we have. Maybe the affected people don't have, but we definitely have. So we can really make choices of showing our solidarity, extending our support. Yeah. So I hope this group would also, try to look at ways of how you can really support people's campaigns. Can you ask us?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
So, roughly, I'm just trying to understand the situation. Roughly, what percentage of, let's say, the forest and the tribals are affected? Because, if actually some, let's say, 2% or 3% or maybe 5% of tribals are actually affected, and if the rest of the forest is actually available, they could actually go to the rest of the forest and they could continue their livelihood and so on. I'm just trying to understand. Because it seems like you're saying land is not available kind of a situation, so I'm just trying to understand what's the situation.
See, forests they cannot go because it is state property. So they can't just go and walk into any forest and start cutting it down. They would be considered as encroachers. If you look at any of our tribal areas, majority of land is forest land. If you look at Vizag district, for example, I think 70% of the land in the scheduled area is forest land, and only the 30% belongs to people. And out of that 30%, a lot of government, industries, and there's land alienation. So my assessment would be about 5 to 10% of land is actually in the hands of the tribal people, even in a scheduled area. They can't really. So there is really not. We are a country where we have a severe land crisis, and it is going for huge acquisitions. So it has tilted the whole food security balance, because a lot of agriculture land has gone into non-agriculture acquisitions. So what is going to happen to our food security? It is not just the food security of the tribal people. All of us also are going to face this crisis. Food prices are going up. So there are a whole lot of economics that we are not working out. It's not a straightforward economics where we say that this Jindal's project is going to give us 500 crores of foreign exchange. But behind that, you will be losing much more. And land is definitely not a luxury that we have today.
In your experience, have you done any research related to Naxalism? Any direct connection between the injustice in land acquisition led to Naxalism?
I have not done any research as such. But when you are living there, you are always having to dialogue with them at some point, or they are also active players in on these issues. So they have a different strategy of approaching these issues. You have a different strategy. So sometimes there is a conflict because you are talking about a non-violent strategy and they are talking about violent ways of getting represented. So research as such I have not done on Naxalism as such, but what is happening to unrest, the whole issue of conflict in these regions, the whole issue of unrest, and the whole issue of how state is addressing these conflicts. There's a whole a dichotomy in the core problems and the way the solutions are being pushed. So I mean, research in what sense? What do you want out of this research?
No, I think she's sorry,
Is there a real reason for the Naxalism to exist?
I think that is a whole new, different debate altogether. So, see, there is a reason for, there is a reason why people still resort to using these mechanisms. When the state is really not listening, when the state is not looking at social equity as a way of development, there will be other forms of means that people will be forced to resort to. It may not necessarily be the desired ways of resorting to, but then sometimes that could be the only way of stopping. In some of these interior areas, mining companies have been forced to hesitate entering, because obviously these are issues they have to contend with.
Why do you think tribal people have not been able to successfully develop a political lobby? Because 8% is not a small population.
There are several factors. The one is that 8% is still a small percentage compared to the Dalit lobby, say, for example. And they are not part of the mainstream society. They are isolated. So it is only now that they are able to connect with each other. And they're spread geographically in different areas. Even within one panchayat, the villages are so scattered. So you'll have to, the terrain is a problem. Then of course the whole issue of literacy. Our government has not at all been sincere in the way it has tried to offer education and basic amenities. So the whole survival, day-to-day survival struggle itself is huge. And it is very sad that they are not able to have a political platform today. But I think it is slowly growing, because there is a growing educated generation today.
The standing committee said that this whole approvals for acquisition has to be very decentralized. In the sense that Gram Sabhas and Panchayats have to be included in this debate.
It's not only included, actually, see, we have something called the PISA Act, the Panchayat Raj Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, where again after a lot of struggle, we managed to get this act enforced and to recognize the right of the tribal people to self-rule. Because historically, right from the British time, there has been a conflict of administration between state as a larger institution and their local cultural laws. It's not as if they were a lawless state. They had a different kind of laws which were conflicting with the state laws. And therefore, even after all these constitution mechanisms came up, like the 5th schedule, still there has been a huge disrespect for the tribal people's right to regulate themselves. So therefore the PISA Act came, saying that the Gram Sabhas have the supremacy over their villages, that they have to be consulted for every activity that happens in their village. But that is just like one mandatory thing, that you just go and get one resolution passed by a Gram Sabha, or not even consult. You just pick up somebody from the village and ask them to sign. Many times we had to fight cases saying this is not a Gram Sabha resolution. So now the standing committee has said that it is not just consult. At least 80% of the Gram Sabha has to give consent to this project. So which is in a way progressive, that you are giving the right of decision making to the local people. But then that right of decision making also depends on their access to information and their ability to stay above political lobbying.
If it could get from bad to worse, because if the decision is at the upper level, they may be demanding some crores of rupees, right? But at Gram Sabha level, this may work out with little lakhs only.
No, it is in addition to that.
No, I mean, we should not at the end of the day disrespect decentralization, because I mean there is a corruption everywhere and every human being is susceptible to this. So we cannot say at centralized level there is no corruption and decentralized level there is corruption, or vice versa. But the more there is decentralization, at least there is a hope that there is accountability at the local level. Right, that the panchayat at some point is held responsible for destroying their lands.
I have a question. When you mentioned that tribes are always isolated from the rest of the society, is it because it's their cultural bias towards the society, or is there another factor? Because it's been so many years, and most of us have had to migrate to one place or the other, one society or the other. But if tribes are isolated, it also makes it difficult for them to organize themselves together or have that literacy in the society where they can connect with the other issues in the society. So why is it that they are actually isolated?
See, they are no longer isolated. We are not allowing them to be isolated anyway, because the mainstream society is going with so much of, every youth today has a mobile phone, so there is no longer that market isolation, or there are different kinds of isolation that we define. So there are, infrastructure has developed to whatever extent, so they are no longer, secluded as they used to be before. Yeah. So there is that physical isolation is no longer, this thing as severe as before. So it could work negatively, it could work positively, because the villages, for example, where I used to live in really hilltop villages, it used to take me 7 hours to walk up the hill. And last year, the road has come. A lot of fighting for the road, and finally the road has come. And just 2 days ago, I was there, and there's a whole film unit there shooting. So there is the first thing that has happened to this village after the road has come is that there is a big film unit invading their village. So that we are no longer allowing them to be isolated. But the positive kind of integration that would actually strengthen their representation, strengthen their ability to articulate, that is not happening at the pace at which this negative infiltration is happening, like literacy, for example, or providing them basic facilities, health facilities. These are not happening at the desired pace, and that is really slow, and the government has no reason to justify for giving such low investments. Basically, government doesn't want to dedicate budgets which are sufficient, adequate to give them basic development. They have a right to basic. We're not being romantic about saying that they're living happy, isolated lives, so don't disturb them. There is a need to intervene at levels which would make their quality of life better in terms of basic primary health, in terms of basic education, reducing the physical drudgery, rural technology. We just don't touch rural technology of what it requires for the tribal people's agriculture to be strengthened. So they are still primitive in their forms of agriculture, but climate change has affected their cropping pattern, their production. So these things we are not really investing enough.
I'm trying to understand, even when there is compensation announced, and how easy it is to claim that. Is there any land-related documentation at all?
Yes.
There is documentation. Okay.
We have our revenue records, but what happens is, in a tribal context, in many places, we have land. India has had a strong, land records are in place, but the problem is, like, example like deformed pattas, where people, at one point there was a lot of movement towards land reforms. So we had a very strong pride in trying to make our landless, marginalized communities landed. So there was a very strong drive towards land reforms, and people got pattas. But then you know how our administration works. So there are a lot of benami pattas, there are people who actually are not the original claimants. And then land transfers hands. So when land acquisition happens, actually the name may be in somebody else's name, but today the people in enjoyment are different. So the compensation is given to somebody else and not the one who is actually in occupation of that land. Lot of cases, these are things which the actual people who are on the land don't benefit from compensation.
It also happens that in tribal areas you don't necessarily have to register land transfers, is it?
No.
You have to necessarily.
Survey settlement. Now the tribal people are aware that they are no longer in those times of 1960s. They all know that they should have a patta, because that patta is the basic legitimacy for them to apply for any scheme. Yeah.
As we are talking about the land acquisition and encouragement of the land, the main basic criteria is the factories and industries need to be set up outside in the outskirts of the cities. The only places where the factories need to set up in the forest areas and after crossing the forest areas. It is the only way for the development of the country. If we take the countries like China, the production value is very high. Because of the production value is very high, the country is developing. If we come to the India, if the factories are not established and not set up, how can the development be done?
So industrialization versus development.
No, one is that factories are only reason to exist. Other than factories, we have several other requirements, needs. The other is
one of the country where the population is second largest population.
Yeah,
and
that
we
is
have
why
a very
we.
few amount of lack of land. The factories cannot be set up in the cities like this, right?
How can you decide? That's a big value judgment. You can say in a city, my house is valuable, so we cannot. But in the forest area, tribal's life is cheap, so you can set up a factory there. Now that's a very relative this thing. How can you say that that land is not valuable? So and forest is not just for the tribals. For there is a certain percentage of forest required for us as urban citizens also to live.
Forest land. Recently, about the Tamil Nadu, I think they have established they have set up the nuclear power plant. It is not in the forest area.
Yeah, it is not in the forest. See, there are several issues. Now, how can you say in a country like India, every inch of land is occupied, and there are people that you are affecting, fishing communities, you are affecting rural communities. There is different. So we really have to think seriously, weigh the pros and cons of setting up an industry, whether the positive impacts outweigh the negative impacts. So, and these, from whose angle are you going to weigh these? From an industry's angle, then obviously their priority is, the most important for the country. Yeah. So, and let's not even take the example of China, because the environment regulations and human rights violations in China beat world records. And they are not only destroying their own country, they are destroying every other country in this world. I have been in Southeast Asia the whole of last month traveling in interior areas. China has bought over every inch of land there, and the human rights violations are huge. And you can, in a way, Western countries, you can lobby, campaign at an international level and cry hoarse and try to, sensitize public shareholders. In China, there is no way you can really do advocacy. Yeah, so let's not even take the example of China. It's going fast at a very negative, hazardous pace.
In fact, behind most of the massacres happening in African continent.
Yeah, because of China.
China, other side is America. So the rebel groups are supported either by China or America, and the government is supported by the other party. So there is a lot of destruction happening in terms of human rights abuses and environmental damage with the name of so-called development. And in fact, this is one point that I want to add. And like mining is mandatory for development is the so-called buzzword nowadays. But I have a friend who is working in Orissa. He says there is 300 kilometers traffic jam because thousands of lorries are taking the iron ore to that seaport. And I asked him, where is this going? He said that the better quality is going to China and the lower quality is going to Gulf countries. So I said, what do they do in Gulf countries? He said that when they dig these foundations for laying the pipes, the petrol pipes and all that. So for that strength, they use this iron ore. So for that kind of thing, we are destroying our forest, our country. So And then also see, if you see the bauxite mining, out of bauxite is made aluminium. But to make aluminium, there is a dangerous chemical process that has to be applied. So that is destroying our environment. Secondly, most of the aluminium that's being generated in India, 80% is used for defense equipment. So again, we are making killing machines with this aluminium. So this is double whammy.
Also, the amount of, in order to produce, extract and produce, you require double the amount of energy. So you're just depleting one resource in order to produce another resource. So are we really looking at these costs?
And I met once one fellow who is working as an assistant to one top 5 richest people in India. He didn't tell me the name, but he said they don't drink Indian water. He said they bring special high quality water from Norway, which costs 15,000 rupees per liter. So, but we have to drink water from highly contaminated water sources because of this industrialization. Yesterday, one environmental activist was telling me the water that comes from Nagarjuna Sagar, the NATCO, the company is polluting the Nagarjuna Sagar directly. They don't have any kind of pollution precautions. Directly, they are releasing it to Nagarjuna Sagar, and that's the water we are drinking. So, now there are so many facts that we have to know. We are just thinking that, oh, we need cars, we need airports and all that, but what's happening to our lives? So ultimately, without eating 3 times, we will not live. So without drinking water every 1 hour, we will not live. So what kind of thing we are eating, what kind of water we are drinking? So unless we cannot afford to buy 15,000 liters rupees per liter. So and they eat highly organic food, but we have to eat highly pesticide food.
But the tribal people actually have always grown organic food, but they have been considered primitive in their way of life. And actually, if you see most of the mining, each state, even the Lok Sabha report has said that each state between 200% to 1000% is illegal mining. So it is not actually going into our country revenue as such, or into the local people's benefit. So most of it is illegal. I think it's really running late. Thank you so much for listening patiently.
On behalf of all of us, I thank Bhanumati Garu for this wonderful talk. I think the points to take away are these. First, the cost of the projects has to be estimated, taking all the environmental costs, all the costs of displacement into account, and only then a project which involves acquisition of land in big proportions has to be taken up. And that is where I think what we are seeing is there is a gap in terms of the cost is only taken as a cost of the produce or cost of the infrastructure. But it's not just that, it is the cost of displacing people, cost of environmental impact like water getting polluted, air getting polluted. So all these costs have to be taken into account before we decide what project is good, what project is not. And but I think, as Bhanumati Garu also told, is that what we have in terms of new act, at least the recommendations of standing committee are in a sense trying to be a little more sensitive than the current act, and they're trying to give a fairer kind of a treatment. But we don't know whether the government will accept those recommendations or not. The initial reactions of the government don't seem to be too favorable to the recommendation of standing committee. I think all of us as vigilant citizens should see how we can campaign or support the recommendations of standing committee also. And last but important is the debate about development, and development at what cost. This is not an easy thing to quantify, but it's something that's there for all of us to think and as we move forward. So thank you all. I thank everybody here for coming and spending this time on Sunday. As a token of our gratitude, I request Chaitanya to hand over for small memento to Bhanumati. The next session is on 29th. It is on sustainable agriculture by Dr. G.V. Ramanjanelu garu, who is a very prominent agricultural activist. It's the same venue. And the session after that is on 12th August. It's on Gandhian economic thought. So juxtaposed with the current economic thought, we wanted to see what Gandhian economic thought was and how does it relate to the current view of development and sustainability. So I request all of you to attend these talks, and we have probably some posters and and we've already passed the feedback forms. Kindly fill them, give us suggestions on how this session was and what are the how we can improve it. New speakers, if you have any idea who we can invite, and I would request Subbareddy garu from Lamakkal to finally say a few words. After this, we'll have a national anthem.
Yeah, I'll just take a couple of minutes. I don't deserve to take more than that after this wonderful Sunday morning's gathering that you had. I mean, any group that gathers on Sunday morning, I really have high regards for you guys. So I don't know how we missed you out on your gathering.